To help us understand what's happening here, we're joined by Patrick Perkins, a fellow at Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law. He's worked with early stage tech companies over in Silicon Valley. Good to see you and welcome to the show. You know, on Thursday, we saw the heart attack or the stroke. By Friday, we went to the hospital, everything got frozen, and by Friday afternoon, we knew it was all shut down, and then we have another casualty over the weekend. What happened here? I explain to the average person what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So this past segment here did a great job of explaining kind of the in and outs of how it happened from a financial sector standpoint. But there's something very uniquely Silicon Valley going on in here, and something very uniquely tech sector to it. And that's the speed at which everything happens. You see, people don't necessarily realize that Silicon Valley is an extremely small community as far as the venture capital world goes. And once wind got around that there was problem at SVB, suddenly all of the venture capitalists were on the phone with their founders saying, there's something going on here, pull your money out. You need to get out of this bank right now. Now, this really sparked a really quick run on the bank. And these businesses, these founders of these small businesses here, as opposed to having tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, maybe they only had 1 million, 2 million, which is relatively small amounts for a business. And so when they all collectively come together, pull their money out quickly, it creates a run on the bank that really isn't possible in many other sectors. In addition to that, SVB just did not diversify their clientele, which worked out for them really well to this date. But by only having really invested in this one sector, the startup sector, it made them really susceptible for this sort of event to happen.
So the company is Silicon Valley based. They have funded numerous startups, very successful in their own right? They make big gambles. They invest in venture capital companies, private equity companies. And these are very rich, well-capitalized people making very big bets on the casino floor. And it didn't work out. Why should the American people or the public or the government step in to backstop, or what some call it a bailout? I wouldn't call it that, but other people are calling it that. Why is it so important and critical to the financial industry that this gets fixed immediately?
Yeah, there's two aspects to that. One, I agree with you that it's a bailout, but it's a qualified bailout. It's not a bailout of the people who made the mistakes. It's the bailouts of the people who are just having their money in this bank and happen to have it in the wrong institution at the wrong time. And why this could have catastrophic downstream effects if there isn't this bailout or not bailout, however you want to call it, is because the tech sector here, these small startup companies, they eventually become larger companies. There have been some pretty good economic models done that have shown that the economy can essentially handle a certain number of small business failures on an annual basis and still be robust. However, if that amount exceeds kind of the threshold limit, it'll put pressures on all sorts of sectors of the economy and could really spiral down into a recession or worse. That's why this sort of step is really important, because we're talking about most tech startup companies. That's the innovation of the future. If those just all went away at the same time, we would be seeing the downstream effects for that for a long time.
I am a protege of the 2008 financial crisis, and I worked on a number of projects post-crisis, and a lot of people today are drawing comparisons. Now, I think there are some things that are similar, but many, many, many things that are very different. This seems to me very much a deposit-based crisis that is founded upon the issue of all these loans that were made, whether it's commercial or whether they're long-dated treasury bills in their deposit base, and it was a very unique situation. Explain to our viewers why this is not the same as what we saw 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's not the same for one reason, as what I mentioned earlier, is that this industry sector is just different. This is different than having the big players across the system having made systemic decisions over years and decades, which led to this sort of breaking point. Essentially, this is the result of one relatively smaller bank, still a huge bank, but relatively smaller, making some poor investment decisions more or less in the short term.
When we were in the banking industry, there was a thing called compliance and risk management. And after the financial crisis, that particular group was bolstered at every major financial institution, from securities companies to banks to anything related to that. where was the risk management on this, and who ultimately is responsible? Is it the CEO? Is it the COO? Is it the entire board? Because these are banks, right? We've been through this before. Someone's responsible, or some group is responsible.
Well, as President Biden said in his address today, everyone's getting fired. So ultimately, everyone at the top there is taking the fall for this, as they should. Ultimately, it's the CEO and the board and those involved in this. And it is a lot to do with the reckless decisions to try and push back on those regulations during the previous administration because they felt that it would be better for their business. Well, that may have been true in the short run, but as we can see here in the long run, it was not actually better for their business because they put themselves in a situation where they were more susceptible to this. However, one area where it differs is while the regulations were rolled back for these sorts of relatively smaller banks, they weren't rolled back for the industry as a whole. So they have no one to blame for themselves for trying to, you can call it greed, you can call it, trying to just put the gas on the accelerator. You can call it whatever you want, but ultimately their hubris in thinking that they did not need that oversight led to their downfall.
Right. Patrick, I could talk about this for a very long time, but I'll spare you the pain of that. Really appreciate it. I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this again tomorrow and the next day and the next day as news continues to break. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.